Let's see here. Michael in Ojai, California. Hey, Michael, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up? Michael?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I just want to say I'm such a huge fan of yours. But
thank you, Michael.
To get to the point, I'm a gay man in my 60s, and I'm from a very staunch Mormon family. And recently, you've been talking about, can we forgive people that have gone over to the Trump supporting?
Oh, this was one of our questions for yesterday that we really never got to, and I think you're the first caller on that issue. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Michael. Forgive my interrupting you.
Well, I've really been struggling with it, Tom, in a very direct way, because the people I love the most have gone, my mother, who I've formed my entire personality over, has gone over to support a man who grabs women's genitals, and it blows my mind that her mind has been polluted by Fox News. But to get to the point that I'd like to make, Tom, I don't believe that this could happen if we had a country where more people had access to higher education. I'm someone who educated very late in life at age 45, and I remember the difference in my self-esteem that occurred when I achieved my master's degree. And I would like to suggest that the reason that your show is so popular and the reason that your listeners love you as much as they do is because you are educating us, and you have never, ever looked down or been condescending toward those of us who are not educated.
Well, as a guy who got kicked out of high school and college, I got kicked out of high school for publishing an underground newspaper, and because they suspected I was smoking pot. I got kicked out of college for being arrested in a SDS riot, basically, among other things. It's hard to look down on people who don't have an education. Go ahead, Michael. I'm sorry I interrupted you again.
What I'd like to suggest, Tom, is that this would not be happening if our population was educated more. And I think that we would be very well advised to begin to offer bachelor's level, master's level, and PhD to every citizen in our country.
Yeah,
we have the technology to do this for the first time in history. And I believe that we need to move education out of the hands of the elite. I am someone who suffers under a great deal of student debt because of my educating late in life, and I was in a car accident and lost control of my loans. But I know that my education has been worth it in terms of what it has done for my personal sense of self-esteem. And I believe that if more people had access to education, they would be more thoughtful. And those of us who have our education, we need to not be looking down our patrician noses at those of us, at the rest of the people who have not been as fortunate as us to achieve their higher education.
Very well said, Michael. We are the only developed country in the world. Of the 34 OECD countries, in 33 of them, there is virtually no student debt. In some cases, if somebody wants to go on to a graduate level degree, maybe. But in most cases, there certainly is no student loan debt crisis in any of those other countries. Louise and I visited Costa Rica a couple of years ago. In fact, it was for filming. It was filming for the Janine Benyus segment of the Ice on Fire movie, the new movie that I'm in and that Leo DiCaprio narrates and George DiCaprio produced. And the cab driver who picked us up at the airport and drove us out to the jungle, like a 2-hour drive out to where we went, was telling us along the way, we were like, what do you like about living in Costa Rica? And he says, well, we have free health care and we have free college. He said, I'm a cab driver and 2 of my kids now have advanced graduate degrees. And I'm like, wow, how do you do that? And he says, well, the country just decided that was a priority. They don't have a military, or they don't have an army in Costa Rica. They do have some military services, but and he said, we just put our money into these things. And the experience that my father had, if you go back and look at our parents' generation, Michael, my father and my wife's father both went to college on the GI Bill. My dad didn't graduate because Mom got pregnant with me, and he dropped out and went to work in a steel mill to get her through that and all that kind of stuff. But Louise's dad graduated, got his law degree, paid for fully by the federal government, and became the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan. And what we know from that experience is that, from the GI Bill experience, is that for every $1 that the United States of America invested in educating the roughly million young men who had come back from World War II and took advantage of the GI Bill, for every $1 that we invested in them, over their lifetimes, they paid an additional $7 to the federal government in taxes because they had higher earnings than people who are not college graduates. So for every dollar invested in college education by a government, and this is what every other government in the world knows, and that and Republicans don't want us to know, for every dollar invested, we make $7 back as a country. And that doesn't even begin to measure the impact of having an educated workforce. We had, because of the GI Bill, we had the most educated, one of the most educated populaces. We also weren't in ruins like Europe was. We had one of the most educated populaces in the world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which is why we led the world in innovation, why we put a man on the moon, why we invented Velcro and transistors and integrated circuits and revolutionized the world and everything. This all came out of, directly or indirectly, the GI Bill. So, Michael, you are absolutely right. And this is, again, this is being on the right side of political history. We've got, the Democratic Party now. We've got this study, from this Professor James Stimson of UNC saying that right now the American electorate is more liberal than the electorate that elected Jack Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson, with that electorate, got past Medicare and Medicaid. So, anyhow.
Thom, I'm a psychotherapist by trade, and I believe that we're all suffering from a collective PTSD.
Yeah.
I want to remind everyone that while we're being distracted by this clown car presidency, what we could be doing is we could be finding new and innovative ways to care for each other. And I think there are many of us out there. This border thing has just made all of us who have a conscience, it's just really pushed us to the edge.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the time is coming when we're just going to have to surround the system with our bodies and with our morals and stop it cold. And I really believe that education for every citizen of the United States is the answer to our economic problems and to our political problems. And if we were able to manifest this, Thom, we would never look back. And I hope that you take your leadership position and continue to do what you're doing with the show and open up education for everyone.
Thank you, Michael. It's my plan to do it until I croak. We'll see if things intercede, but I appreciate that. Michael, thank you for the call.